Afternoon. I'd like to call to order the 2023 Annual Alumni Association Board of Directors. We have a lot to attend to today in a short amount of time. Welcome everybody to Alumni Weekend. It's an exciting time for all of us, alumni returning to campus to connect, engage, support, and celebrate everything going on. I'm going to start off, we're going to do this annual board meeting a little differently. As many of you are aware, we recently conducted an alumni attitude survey to get the pulse of the alumni and how we can better serve them. So with that, we formed a steering committee for this endeavor, comprised of myself, Alice, our vice president, Amanda Finch from Student Affairs, and Teresa Russo from Academic Affairs. We also engaged an outside company, Performance Enhancement Group, PEG, who did our survey the last go around in 2017. So, you know, they can create a baseline. We are recording this this meeting, which will be posted on probably the website at some point later on, in case you guys want to follow up or you want to, you know, rehash something and, you know, ask some more further questions. That's great. I'm going to kick this off and I'm going to turn it over to Rob from PEG, who led the alumni attitude survey for us, and he's going to go into you know, the results of the survey and give us a presentation of that. Rob, you are on mute.
How's that?
Perfect.
All right. So thanks, everybody. And I'm happy to be here. Let me tell you a little bit about the company as I get started. PEG's been around since the early 90s, but my team's had a singular focus on this work, what it is that makes alumni want to engage with their alma mater. We've worked with close to 350 schools. As Drew said, it's the second project we did with you. That gives us the ability to look at your findings in a kind of contextual framework. Not all the questions you ask are questions that other alumni have, associations have asked their alumni, but it does give us sort of what an average alumnus thinks. So we'll be able to show those results in that kind of contextual framework. I also want to just take a minute. Oh, we had about 1,400 responses, which is up from last time. We had about 1,000. We did have a larger database. The response rate stayed about the same. But let me put that in context. Gallup or Quinnipiac will do a national poll of 150 million registered voters, and they'll argue correctly so that they can hit that plus or minus 3% often if they share the numbers with as few as 1,500 people that they polled, which is a tiny percent of 150 million. What you want to do in this work, you get your number of responses sufficiently large that it lessens the opportunity for those outliers to overstate their case. So with 1,400 responses, I think we have good data. I won't go through it here. This is also a shortened presentation of one that Drew has seen and Laura. And I'll explain what's in that broader one. You, I'm sure, could ask them if you're interested in looking at any of the slides that are in that broader presentation that aren't here. The one other thing I'll mention is that we did spend a lot of time with Laura and her team to make sure the survey was branded for you, and it wasn't PEG asking. I think it's really important on any alumni survey project to own the eventness of what you're doing. This is that one communication you sent out to all your alumni and said, you know what, your opinion's important to us. And I think that's a really important conversation and a real opportunity for engagement. How many events do you do that 1,400 of your alumni attend? Well, this would be one. So sort of own that eventness of it. I know that there's already plans in place to follow up and to share out some of the findings. As I said, we compared it to that national average of alumni. These are the schools that we've worked with in the last 5 years. It's all kinds of schools. It's about 380,000 alumni in that group. So it's just all sorts of different schools, just to give you a sense of that. If you filled out the survey, and I hope you did, You might remember that it was in, we ask about your student experience and your alumna experience. That was not how the questions were designed with the steering committee. What we wanted to look at was affinity, giving, messaging, and communications and programming. So as I share out the findings today and help us all walk through what the narrative is underneath it, I'll do it that way. So we're not going to go through question 1, 2, 3, 4. You'll see I bounce around across the questions, trying to keep them in sort of that idea, what the questions have we're trying to get at. One of the things that we always want to look at in this work is how young alumni are different from older alumni. In the United States, we tend to think generational. That doesn't really work as well when trying to understand how alumni think of their alma mater. It's great for the ad agencies, marketing firms. That commonality of early life experience is a really good way to attract people's common interest. But with respect to your relationship with your alma mater, it's different. It's intertwined in some different things. We all bring our generational characteristics to our alma mater, but once we're there, other things really influence our long-term relationship with that institution. The first being the strength of affinity. It's where we were at when we went through the transition to becoming an adult. So it happened to us, with us, at a really transformative time in our life. And it's something that's always going to be with us. If you think about it, your higher education is really, in all likelihood, the most expensive thing you'll ever buy in time and money that you'll never be able to sell back to somebody. Once you're a graduate from SUNY Oneonta, you always are. When people say, where did you go to school? That's now part of you. So it's something that stays with us, that's part of who we are. And it's also going to be intertwined in the political and economic circumstance that exists when we're there. Universities, if it's really hard to get a job because the economy's bad when I walk off campus, I probably feel a little differently about the experience than if the economy's on fire and everybody wants to hire me when I graduate. Also, universities in the United States are, and probably should be, sponges and echo chambers of political discourse, where young people are figuring that stuff out, so it's stronger there. So all that stuff sort of intertwines, I think, in our relationship with our alma mater. So in today's presentation, we'll look at alumni, because we want to know how young alumni are different from older alumni, but we'll look at it through a lens of eras of graduation. And over the years, these are the eras that the data have kind of led us to, and I think intuitively makes sense. If you layer in sort of the generational elements of that, if you think of the baby boomers, it's just different, right? That 60s crowd, that's that youth-driven culture, the Vietnam War, Civil Rights Act, economy's on fire. You want a job when you walk off a campus, you can have it. All that changed for their younger brothers and sisters about the time Nixon resigned. It's a little more pessimistic politically. We're in the Ford-Carter recession. Jimmy Carter's turning down the rheostat in the White House. There's gas lines. And then by the Reagan years, that kind of Reagan boom, the economy's taken off again for the latter baby boomers. So it's just different for them, even though they're all baby boomers. .commerce even more pronounced difference, I think. 94, that's when the big tech IPOs were kicking in. Say, if I walked off your campus in 96, 95, 96, 97, if I could say the word internet, people would hire me. If I could get on the internet and get funded, I figure I'm rich and retired by the time I'm 30. I'll never work for anybody older than me. We're spending the peace dividend because the Berlin Wall came down in the 80s. There's never going to be war again. There's only one superpower. Very heady time for the early Gen Xers. All that changed in 2000 and 2001. .com bubble burst, really hard to get a job. And odds are, if I was on your campus in 04 or 05, I might well have had a conversation with somebody going to or coming from a theater of war after 9/11. So different. For the millennials, there was this kind of recovery going into 08, and then boom, the financial collapse of 08 really changed everything. And coming out of it, we had this strong period of real strong economic prosperity but always tempered by political polarization. We haven't defined the coronavirus in error yet at PEG, but we are separating out the data. It's clear they had a very different student experience than everybody else. I'm sure it will be an error. We just don't know the outcome yet. We don't know what the political and economic circumstance post-pandemic are going to be. So we'll break out the data. When we look at internal statistics, the rule of thumb is if you have 30 or less in an internal cohort, you're really anecdotal. You're just talking to somebody. And as you increase that number, your confidence that what you're looking at is representative of the population increases at a pretty steep slope until you hit about 1,200, 1,500, depending on the answering pattern of the question. And then it continues onward at a lesser slope. That's why a lot of the polling houses tend to stop there. So all these numbers are good. We're not getting a crystal clear image of what's in those populations, but we are getting some clarity as to the distinctions across them. We also looked at loyalty level. We have a set of questions I'll get into in a minute that kind of define low, medium, and high loyalty. And so we looked at how those cohorts, because what we're trying to do here is develop or help you all better understand the persona profile of your alumni in general, but then what's the differences? What are unique elements of the persona construct of those subpopulations? So we wanted to look across those eras. We wanted to look across their loyalty. And we also wanted to look at legacy versus first gen. Legacy being somebody who said that they had a brother, sister, mother, father, grandparent that also attended. In today's presentation, I'm not going to show many, if any, of these legacy slides. The interesting thing there, sort of the dog that didn't bark. The interesting thing there is that there wasn't a lot of difference. But you're welcome to look at those slides when every set of slides I show you in that broader presentation, there's a slide by legacy first gen. I'm also not going to show a lot of the loyalty slides because by and large, the higher the loyalty, the more interested they are, the more engaged. And so it's a pretty obvious story. There are a couple of instances that we found it interesting in my discussions with Drew and Laura and the rest. And we have decided to share some of those here. But always, if you have questions, go back into that broader presentation. The first question I wanted to share with you was this one that we asked about intent to financially participate. So the scale goes from I never have and I don't think I ever will to I have in the past, but I'm done. My kid got kicked out. I ran out of money. Something happened. I'm done. I never have, but I think I might. I currently am. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, or I currently am and I plan to do more. And you're pretty consistent with that all school in yellow and what we saw in 2017. So that lays the context. The reason I started with this slide is here. There's a question I'm going to get to in a minute that asks, how often do you promote SUNY Oneonta to others? And they can say never, occasionally, regularly, or all the time. And what we're looking at here is the percent within a choice category. So each choice will add up to 100. It's how people who answered that way spread out across a choice category. So as we would expect, there's a higher density of never to occasionally promote over here and a higher density of regularly or all the time promote over there. We expect that. That's not what makes it interesting. Here's what makes it interesting. 28% of your alumni who say I never have and don't ever plan to do anything to financially support the school are yet still in their minds regularly or all the time promoting the school to others, with 36% of the folks that say I have, but I'm done doing that. And you can see it's over 70% of the folks that say I never have and don't intend to, or at least occasionally. So there's always this thing that happens at universities, especially in annual funds, and they'll say, well, let's stop sending so much stuff to people who are never going to be supporters. Let's stop doing some of those things. And this argues right against that. This says there's a lot of positive energy out there, and you all, the alumni board, of everybody on campus and off campus and supporters are probably the ones most responsible for helping the alumni relations team and the advancement team stand in that gap and try to, how do we actualize that potential? And it's really the potential of alumni doing the things that alumni do to make the school better. And I really put that mostly in 4 categories. Alumni are more likely than anybody else, I think, to recommend the school to future students. They're more likely than others to hire graduates from their alma mater. They do what you're doing. They volunteer, they guest lecture, they bring real life circumstance into the curriculum, and they obviously are a core and very important resource for much needed financial support to the school. So all those things matter and all those things are relevant here. The next slide I wanted to show you breaks it out by those eras, with the red being the 60s crowd, the yellow being that Ford Carter recession, the Reagan years, the dot-commers, the post 9/11, the post financial collapse of 08, that economic recovery, and this last one being that coronavirus. Now we're looking at the percent across, not within a category. What makes this one interesting is 38% and 24% of your most recent graduates are saying, I never have, but I might. Now, some of that I'm sure is optimism of youth. You know, someday I'm going to be rich and famous and put my name on one of these buildings. But it's also, in large part, you're in the probability business. If you look out at any graduating class, 8, 10, 15, 20% of those people, maybe more, will find themselves in their lives in a position to make a significant and possibly transformative gift to the institution. You just don't know who and how. They might invent the next iPhone, they might win the lottery, but you know they're there. So how do you increase the probability that over their lifetime, they're going to be thinking of SUNY Oneonta in their philanthropic decision-making? Well, the most leverage you have on that curve are those earliest years, because you shift the whole curve up. The prime example is, I like to use, is the giving pattern of Michael Bloomberg to his alma mater, Johns Hopkins University, where to date, he's given that school in excess of $2 billion with a B. A lot of money, and I'm sure they're happy about it. What makes it interesting for this discussion, though, is the first gift he gave was a $5 gift, and he gave it the second year after walking off campus. And from what I know of his financial wealth today and then, I think it's safe to assume that $5 gift probably represented a larger portion of his net worth at the time than the last $5 million gift he gave today. But they shifted that curve. I'm not saying he might still have given $2 billion without that, but it sets the stage of engagement, which is what you all are working on. How do we get alumni to be engaged, to be supportive in all those ways that alumni can? The next question is really part of a series of questions that I'll share. This one goes to, how would you rate your decision to attend? And that's just kind of noise. I wouldn't pay much attention to the slight difference there. You're pretty consistent with the all school. You're pretty consistent with the prior year. If you were a lot lower, you'd probably feel bad about it. If you were a lot higher, you'd probably feel good about it. Problem with this question is, in either case, you don't really have any idea how to change what you're doing to make it better. It's not that kind, it's a non-actionable question. So it's good to see baselines, to see trends, but more importantly, and you'll see in a minute, we'll collapse these questions into an index, and then we can look at how do things have a cohesiveness or correlation to that, what we'll call an affinity index. So I'll go through these pretty quickly because they are worth looking at from a baseline perspective. If you look across the eras, there's some noise in there. The younger folks maybe a little more feeling good about their decision, but pretty flat, I would say, across those eras. And you can see here, like I said, the higher the loyalty, the more likely they are to feel good about the decision. So those things are all kind of connected. If you want to look at the legacy, there's another slide just after this one in that broader presentation that does that. Experience as a student, pretty similar, maybe down a little from what we saw, consistently above what we see on average across those schools. And again, pretty consistent, no real theme, I think, showing up here in terms of young and old. This post-Great Recession, remember that one had a little smaller N, so it has a tendency to be noisier. N meaning number of responses. But again, that nice connection to loyalty we see a lot throughout this. Willingness to promote, very similar to what we saw last time, very similar to that all school average. Here we do see, except for a little noise here in 9/11, that younger folks a little more likely to be promotory. We expect that, right? Because when I was in my 20s, my friends and I talked about our college and universities more than we do now. So there's just more chance to do that. But on this promoting, really connected to that sense of affinity. And overall current opinion, again, you can see very similar to what we saw, and no big patterns. Interesting, we see this drop off in the current in that economic recovery. We'll often see that for younger alumni will drop off a little. I call it's my thinking on it's due to proximity in time. I'm still mad I got the grade I didn't think I should have gotten in some class, and I'm mad at that professor. And 30 years later, I'm not kind of remember I took the class, but I don't remember at all what my grade was and maybe my professor. What's interesting though is you do have this sort of surge of energy from those folks who had that really difficult time of trying to go to school in the heart of a pandemic. So I think you have this nice energy build, and we'll see it elsewhere in those folks that were there during the pandemic and are in what we'll probably end up calling the coronavirus pandemic or whatever. And again, that connection to affinity, and then their experiences as an alumnus or an alumna, pretty similar. But again, interesting, those youngest folks, I think excited in a sense to want to be an alum and be able to be active. Doesn't mean I suspect that they're coming to all your events, but that they can, that they feel that opportunity's there, I think is there. And again, that connection. So like I said, we collapse these questions into an affinity index, and you're pretty consistent when you do all that. If you break it down to a percent from the all school and what we saw last time. And we like these 4 questions because in my mind, they sort of box in the compass. Decision to attend, bringing some historic perspective, willingness to promote an active perspective, experience as an alum, a current perspective, and overall current opinion and aggregate perspective. So similar kind of question on this aggregate affinity is, well, how connected do you feel? And we put it on a net promoter scale, but what I'm looking at here is really the 7 or higher. And you had 49% there. You're kind of up in this top box, but you're in a good shape. 49% are saying I'm pretty darn connected. 7 or higher on this 11-point scale. Hang on to that number because it's important as we look at a slide coming up in a minute. Very consistent across the eras. 76% of your alumni say, I would recommend. So that's a pretty good difference. And that's your sweet spot as an alumni board, because that's saying that energy's there, that love of institutions there. I'm telling people to go, and I could probably get more connected if I felt like there was a reason or a way or something that excited me about it. So I call that kind of an opportunity gap for you all, for an alumni board, for an alumni engagement, anybody thinking about how to better engage alumni. And again, very consistent as we look across the eras. We also wanted to localize where that affinity is. And it's predominantly with the school overall, their degree, and their college. So that's kind of where the heart of it is. What makes it interesting is if you look at it and you can see those areas kind of bounce around up here, but kind of everybody's up there. It's these ones that sort of interest me. That major, the faculty member, and the student organization are really much higher for the younger, more recent graduates. And it makes sense. And you may have already thought that's probably true, but this data kind of helps solidify that. It's that more granular look. I'm closer to what I did, so I'm thinking less about the whole thing and more about that student organization, that faculty member. So as you think about strategies to engage your younger alumni, those are nice areas to focus, to engage them back with the marketing club or whatever they were involved in. Those are all things that I think have value, and not just value for the people that you're doing it with, but the telling of all the others like them that that's what's happening. Because even if they don't do it, knowing that other people like them are doing it might be that thing that says, well, maybe I will go to that next event, or maybe I will do something to get a little more involved. And again, like I said, we don't have a lot of these, but all these loyalties, and the reason they aren't, a lot of these slides just look like this, is the more they have loyalty, the more likely they are to have loyalty to everything. So it's a pretty similar pattern across. With respect to messaging, the kind of, in my mind, core question to messaging that was in the survey was one about how much do things impact your overall opinion of the school? It's the secret sauce question. It's a little bit complicated slide, hard to look at. The way I like to read these slides is first, just look at that dark blue, ignore everything else. That's the percent of people who said this thing has critical impact on my opinion. And then maybe look at the dark blue and light blue, because that's the significant to critical, and do the opposite thing down here. Now, you may be looking at athletics, say, oh, we spend some money on athletics, maybe we shouldn't. I can tell you, even the Clemsons and Auburns and Floridas that have those huge football programs, athletics is going to trickle to the bottom of this. It matters to them, but it's more often than not not why people went to college. They went there to make their lives better. And as they start doing a survey like that, that's, I think, where they tend to go. It's, I think, why the NCAA did that whole ad campaign where they would show a teacher and a nurse and a doctor and a business person, and they'd say 100% of our athletes go pro. Some of them go pro in their sport, but they're going to be the leaders in your communities. What's interesting in this slide is the thing that goes to the top. 80% said significant or critical impact is value and respect for degree. And that's pretty consistent with what we see across universities. I think we as alumni look at, when we think of our degree, we want to know, how is that thing, that degree on our wall, more valuable to us today than it was when we walked off campus? And what's happening at my alma mater that makes me believe it's going to be even more valuable to me in the future? We call that equity of degree. It's different from other equity. It's not like a stock, right? Where if I own a stock and I look at the ticker, we could all agree instantly whether it's worth more today than it was last year, because measured in cash, and we know how to measure that. Equity of degree, each one of you in that room might have a different set of ways that you're defining that value. You all want it to be more valuable, but you may not all be doing the exact same calculation as to what is value, what is the equity of my degree. That's what this other stuff kind of helps us understand. These other things are sort of in descending order, the things that have the highest sort of foundational construction of that equity value proposition. I'll also point, the second highest critical is a diverse and inclusive environment on campus, but it's also got the least significant. It's got the highest critical at 36% and 37%, but less here. So it tends to be a little more bifurcated. People, it really, really matters. And then some people, it matters a lot. And so it sort of bounces around there a little bit. And you can see that here some, if you look at those areas. I know it's sort of a complicated slide, but some things pop off it to me. First is that diverse and inclusive environment, way up there in importance for your younger alumni. as is outreach to community. Your older alumni relative to the others are going to say history and tradition's a little more valuable. Value and respect for degree is kind of at the top for everybody. And then you see some other variations sort of pop in here. So it's really equity of degree, this handful of things on the top for everybody, with some emphasis on some of these other things for younger and older alumni. Another messaging question, and I know it won't appear to be initially a messaging question. We ask, how important were things to your student experience and how well was it provided? So we're not looking for what the school needs to change in its curriculum. This is an alumni survey to help us better understand how to engage alumni. So why this question? If you agree with me about equity of degree, then it's also, you have to think about, how is equity defined? Well, I don't care what that stock price was worth last year, other than it might make me feel good if it's worth more today. I care what it's worth today. Equity is always defined in its current valuation. And the current valuation at a university is the student experience and the research. I mean, that's the heart of what is happening, and it's mostly the student experience. I'm going to bet anytime that you all have a board meeting and they bring some students in to talk about stuff that's happening, you reach out to Laura and Drew and say, you know, that's one of the best meetings we've had, because it's what you want to know. You want to know what that student experience is. So what are we looking at here? We're trying to better understand what alumni want to hear the most about the student experience. And how do we do that? Oops, sorry. We look at the gaps. So if I said skills training for career was pretty darn important to me, and as I look back on it 10 years ago, I wish I'd have gotten more. I didn't get as much as now I kind of wish I would have. Those gaps are where the energy is. I refer to this as the more, better, different question. This is where I think alumni are telling you they want to know how the current student experience is more, better than it was for them. So it's hard to read, right? Like this. So we chart it this way, which is again in descending order of how important these things are, but the direction and size of the difference between importance and performance. Where's that energy? And now it starts to jump off the page. Skills training for career, for sure, followed by academics and classes, relationship with faculty, and a relationship with other students. And the energy is kind of it's lower for your older alumni. It kicks in strongest around the 2008 Great Recession folks and forward. For some of these, you can see skills training for career, really those economic prosperity, those folks that kicked in around 2014, they were there around start in 2014. And you can also see some dribbling of issues down here for coronavirus and others, but you can't do everything. If I was going to focus on the 4 things to talk about the student experience, those would be the things that I would focus on. And interestingly, we're always saying, well, how do we get those people that never do anything more engaged? And the low loyalty people, it could be their low loyalty because they're mad about some of these things, but it also that they had a high sense of connection and all those things that we looked at earlier. Talking about how the current student experience is better in these things might be the way to get those folks more engaged. And then we wanted to know, well, there are a lot of topics. What are the topics that you're interested in? Class notes and alumni stories, followed by visual content, research, and these things kind of coming down. What makes this interesting, if you look, and these are all those eras, and this is descending order of what came in top for each of the era, the top 6 items, or I guess there's 6 here. In this red, we're looking at things that tend to trend more towards older alumni. So class notes are really big for older alumni. They kind of drop out for the folks in 2014 up to the pandemic. And then the coronavirus folks are saying, well, I'm kind of looking at that. It's still in my top 6. Things that are in purple trend to more the younger, more recent graduates. And that's things like events, research stories, campus life news. Those are the things that they're here for these older folks, but they tend to trend upward for the younger. And the ones in blue are everywhere. Alumni stories, visual content, faculty stories, those kind of are everybody. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about with respect to messaging is to take you back to that index we built. Remember the index, the affinity index that had the 4 elements to it? Well, we looked at all the questions in the whole survey and said, of all those questions, which are the ones that have the highest cohesiveness or connectedness to that index? And that's this list. So all these things are high value talking points. The problem is it's all these things. How do I talk about all this stuff? It's all over the place, I think. Let me start with saying the ones at the top, we expect to be at the top. How likely are you to recommend? How connected are you? What's your overall connectivity? How loyal are you to the institution overall? Those are huge. And that high number, that 0.7, I don't want to dredge up bad memories from your stat days, but what we're looking at is correlation. And all that means is if I said I'm really likely to recommend, there's a really good chance I'm the same person that said I promote all the time, it's a great decision. And the beauty of the mathematics of correlation would argue that the other thing is also true. If I said, I don't recommend, I don't do that much, I'm probably the same person who said, and I don't promote much, and it was an okay decision. Both of those things need to be true to have a high correlation. I like to call it cohesiveness in how they answer. So we expect those to be high. Now you got all this stuff. Well, how do I talk about all this stuff? In my thinking, all of these fall into 2 categories. All of these questions go to how well the experience at Oneonta prepares and prepared graduates for their lifetime well-being. Many of them, most of them, actually come out of the question where we asked, how much do you think your experience prepared you for stuff? So we're getting into that preparedness, and you're consistent with what we see at all schools. It's not what makes this question interesting. What makes this question interesting is how tightly it's connected to affinity. The other thing that makes it interesting is it takes alumni a while to figure it out. So the longer they are away, they start thinking, when I was there, I learned how to I was really comfortable talking to professors, and I could go up to any professor and ask him anything, and I felt comfortable doing that. And then when I got in the business world, I found that I was more comfortable because of that, talking to my manager or my boss or people. Whatever it is, there's this thing that alumni can probably talk about, how it's something that happened while I was at the university that's really fundamental to who I am today in my community or my job or my family or whatever. What you want to do, since you see that pattern, what's it also telling us? It's telling us that there's a learning curve. So when there's a learning curve, then all of a sudden you say, well, maybe I can do things to accelerate that learning curve. So find examples for alumni, older alumni from somebody else saying, I didn't get it when I was your age, but I've really learned, or I now understand how this thing that happened to me while I was there is fundamental about really my lifetime well-being. And then we also ask a question, which is sort of a derivative of this. How much did various things contribute to that preparedness? And so the things that you all said most contribute are collaborating with others, critical thinking, oral communications, problem solving, and decision making. So I argue this question is another more, better, different question. So if that's what your alumni believe, kind of, and you could go down further, I just drew the bar there, but if these are the things in descending order that you all believe most contributed to your preparedness for lifetime well-being, I suspect it's fair to argue that you want to know how current students are even getting more of this, because it means the equity of your degrees going up. So this would be another set of more, better, different kind of questions. And it's kind of all everybody, it's sort of the same, you know, bounces around old, young, and something you can see some variance. I wouldn't go into analysis paralysis on this kind of why is that up there and this down here? You're looking for themes that can really help guide you as you're thinking strategically and tactically about how to better engage the alumni. The rest of these are connection with their college and interested in hearing about engaged alumni and what is happening at the school, about events and their degree and alumni stories and message from the president. That's that next tier. So this is thematically, I think, what's going on. These are sub elements of it. So it makes all of these now fall into kind of two categories that I think are a little easier to think about when you're doing your strategic and tactical planning. With respect to communications, we ask how important are these things, these ways that we communicate, and how are we doing? Going back to the magazines up on top. When we look at those gaps, it's awesome. We're exceeding expectations on everything. But this is the biggest problem with statistics, because that's an average, and that doesn't represent anybody. It's just the average of everybody. And that's why you want to look at those cohorts within the aggregate population. Your oldest alumni, those 60s crowd, Woodstock crowd, and then that post-Watergate, they're saying, you're knocking my socks off on everything. You're great. I love all the communications. You are really awesome. Your younger alumni, starting really in the 90s, are saying, not so fast. I want to know, how is it that I'm benefiting because I'm a member of this club called an alumnus or an alumna of SUNY Oneonta? And it doesn't necessarily mean that I get a free hat. It could mean that I get to help current students make my degree better. It could be a lot of things that's a benefit, but they're more focused on that element of it. And it's also low loyalty folks. So it's another way to get at those low loyalty folks. We ask them when they receive the magazine, what do they do? And most of them say they read it. Some don't even think they get it. And the ones that don't think they get it tend to be the younger folks. And it's possible with this most recent crowd, it's going to their parents or whatever, and they're not seeing it. Their parents might be enjoying it, but and also you can see that yes, the high loyalty people are doing it, but you still have 40% of even your low loyalty people are reading the magazine. The other thing we want to look at with respect to communication is that Goldilocks question. Do I get too much, not enough, or just the right amount of stuff? Most people say it's about right. Over 60%, over 40% want more stuff on discounts or whatever. But by and large, they want more of everything. This is not nearly enough, and I want more. There's a fair amount of, well, I get too many solicitations. But the answer to communications is not a zero-sum proposition, I think. It doesn't mean if I want to do more of this, I have to do less of this. It's just the opposite. If I want to do more solicitations and I know I need to do that to get the money that we need to run everything, I need to do more of this stuff. More of this creates the opportunity for more of that. And it's your younger alumni who are probably least likely to attend an event or saying, well, are the ones saying, I want more of those programs. And it's kind of loyalty is sort of everybody's in there the same. With respect to programs, we said, how important are various programs for alumni, and how well do you feel supported? And the things most important to your alumni are to help with internship jobs, mentoring, volunteering, service networking, and providing financial support. When we look at those gaps, these are the things that percolate to the top. And it's really strong for that economic prosperity, that crowd that walked off campus after 2014. Does this mean all of a sudden at your next networking event, you're going to get 100 people from 2014 show up? Absolutely not. What it means, though, is that they care about it. So as you're going to events, thinking about events, we tend to measure an event based on the number of people that walked in the door, right? More people walked in, a better event, which is important. We know, I call it the paradox of event attendance. In any philanthropic endeavor, if you want somebody, you know that if somebody does something, comes to an event, they're more likely to do something else, come to another event, and then maybe, like you, end up on a board, and then find other ways to support the school. So we know it's important to get them to an event. What they're telling us here, I think, though, is whether or not I go to the event, there's an intrinsic value to me in knowing the event is occurring. In knowing that events are there. It's why you all have, from our prior study, even if you don't go to an event, my suspicion is you sometimes get an email that says, sorry, you couldn't make it, but let me tell you a little about an event. That's the right thing to do, and really the right thing to do for that crowd that walked off after 2014. And again, it's a way to better engage those low loyalty folks. But we also said, so that was about what do you think alumni generally ought to do? But we also wanted to know, what are you most likely to do? And here we get a little different list. Well, I might speak, I might volunteer to speak. A network was in the other one, attend some alumni events and social media. And this tends to be, your younger folks are saying volunteer to speak, mentor, identify job opportunities, and network. Those are the things that they say they most might do. Your older alumni are saying, well, they're more likely to say, well, I've got money now, maybe I'll give some. And your mid-career folks are kind of that social media crowd. And again, that connection to loyalty. So why don't they show up at a stuff? Well, it's mostly time or geographic distance. This is just in distance. The further they get away from you geographically, the more likely they are to say, I can't do that. And that means the noisier you ought to be, the further you get away. The more communications, the more important the after event communication. Let them know you were there, even if they're not going to show up. And then lastly, we wanted to look at, we asked them, well, what did you do when you were there? Why do we ask this question? Well, if you want a young alum to get involved, I think the best thing you could ever do is if, as a student, they see an alumnus, preferably a younger alumnus, on campus doing something, and say, you know what, when I get out of here, I want to be like her. I want to be that person that's back here talking at the marketing club. That then, in my mind, begs the question, well, where should the association, or where should the alumni group, and where should alumni themselves show up on campus? And it'd be the places people most remember. And for your younger alumni, it's the academic clubs and community service first. And then secondly, those intramurals, clubs, and professional and career-related activities. For your older alumni, they're thinking residence life. And it is, I think, interesting to note, your more engaged alumni were more likely also to be active when they were on campus. Not surprising, but there's some data to that. We asked, tell us somebody who made a difference when you were there, made a big impact on your experience as a student. These are the names that sort of percolated to the top. Hopefully some people that you love are in that list. And we also said what program had special activity, special interest to you. And it's the things we saw: intramural, student teaching, resident advisor, some fraternity sorority stuff, work study. What's it mean to be an alum? It makes me proud. It's a great experience I had when I was there, the pride I have in it, the memories that I made it through. I graduated. Best decision of my life. I'm sure you've heard that. And then what do they want from the school going forward? Continue to grow, stay in touch with, keep me connected. Those are the kinds of ideas that percolated up out of those verbatim comments. Think Dale Carnegie, Tony Robbins 101. If you want to be in relationship with somebody, all the interpersonal gurus will say the most important thing you can do is ask that person their opinion and convince them you care about their opinion. So we've done that. That's what this is. That's what I talked about, this being an event, your relationship with the alumni. We started it by asking their opinion. We looked them in the eye by making sure the survey was branded for you when they answered. And there's already work underway. And I think any ideas that you have would be helpful. You want to do the next thing. That's really interesting. Let me make sure I understood what you said. So that not only am I, it's sort of like if you see somebody you want to be in a relationship, you ask their opinion about stuff. And then when they answer, you look them in the eye and at least pretend like you're paying attention when they answer. But then how do you prove you're paying attention? Wait a minute, that's really interesting. Let me make sure I understood what you said. I wanted to make sure I understood that. And then you want to say, as you talk about this study, talk about the things that you've done since the last study and the things that over the next 2 years that you do as a result of what they said, because that's indicating that you actually did something. You incorporated into your behavior their opinion, which is that engagement loop. So the last 2 slides are just a summary of everything that I went through. Here's just a recap of that paradox of event attendance. The areas that have the highest energy that they want to know, they may not attend, but they want to know that it's the gap between importance and support. It's like job opportunities, mentoring, volunteering to speak, serving as ambassadors, hosting events showed up for younger alumni, and leadership, being on committees and stuff, showed up for them as well. A little different from what they say they might actually do. At the top of that list was, I would speak if I had the opportunity, and networking, it showed up both. Attending general events, that's something I might do, and social media tended to be a little older. What are the high level takeaways outside of that? Well, first, that low hanging fruit of let them know you heard what they said, and do it as many ways as you can. They want to know more about how the students are learning. Remember that second of the more, better, different questions. So the more that you can talk about how the current students are learning how to collaborate with each other, critical thinking, effective communication, problem solving, decision making, the more that alumni hear that current students are getting that, probably the more they'll feel the equity of their degrees increasing. And they also want to know about, this was that first one, how the quality of academics and classes is improving. Again, how they're developing relationship with each other. That went to both of them. Skills training that they get to be more successful in their careers, and the relationships that are developed with faculty. Those high level talking points grouped into the 2 categories with cohesiveness to affinity. How their experience prepared them for their lifetime well-being, and that connection with the college and interest in hearing more about engaged alumni, what's happening on campus. Equity of degree, the thing that has the most impact, kind of defined by accomplishments of students, the diverse, inclusive environment, a little stronger for the younger folks, availability for scholarships, the beautiful campus, accomplishments of faculty, and then school rank. And then you want to target communications on successful outcomes of event, owning that paradox of event attendance. And the more that you share this, the more that other folks, you now as the alumni people have data, which puts you at a point where other folks all over campus might have an interest in better understanding what alumni think and how how the things they do can better engage that really and critically important resource of the university. So that's kind of it. Drew, I think I made it under my deadline, although I did not give your team a lot of time to talk.
Let's open it up for questions. Does anybody have any questions? I know there's a lot to intake. And I'll make sure that we email out the full presentation to everybody after the meeting,
Yeah.
so that you guys can all digest it, yourselves
In bits.
in bits and pieces, absolutely. But right off the bat, does anybody have any questions, comments?
I
Jane?
wondered if, like, how is this going to be disseminated to all of them? Or will it be, or?
That's a great question. So part of the answer to that is we're going to, this summer, we're going to assemble an ad hoc committee to further discuss these findings and to incorporate those into our strategic plan for the next 3 to 5 years. And within that, we'll be able to disseminate this information to the representative alumni population.
And I might be speaking out of line, but I'm pretty sure at the university level, the communication folks are looking at ways through infographics and other ways to let alumni in general know that you heard what they said.
Which is part of the reason why we pulled from student affairs. We had somebody from the steering committee from student affairs. We had somebody from academic affairs in the steering committee. So that was all part of that plan on incorporating the campus departments and disseminating some of this information and strategically planning out those questions.
It is a little bit of information by fire hose, so you may come up with some thoughts and questions at some point, and we're always happy to discuss that with you.
So as I mentioned, we're planning to assemble an ad hoc committee. So I'm not going to ask you right now, but if you guys, anybody's interested in volunteering to be on that committee, please reach out to Laura or myself, and we'll get that going over the summer, and then start working on that. If nobody else has any questions for Rob, I guess I can dismiss you, Rob.
Well, you all have a great and very productive meeting, and it's been a pleasure working with your team. I think this data, there's a lot in here that can really help you in your strategic and tactical planning, and I'm always available to answer any questions as they come up.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.